Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
It may be months away, but already the acts for this year's National Folk Festival are being announced. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. 2019 will be the second year the National Folk Festival will take place in downtown Salisbury. Last year, there were over 350 artists that included musicians and craftspeople. Take a look at the first lineup we have in our studio this morning. Lora Bottinelli, she's the Executive Director of the National Council for the Traditional Arts. Also, we have Caroline O'Hare, who is the local manager here, and Blaine Wade, who is Associate Director. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So, Laura, let me turn to you first and give us an overall view of what we expect to see at the festival.
Well, we're very excited to be having the National Folk Festival in downtown Salisbury again this year. And so for 3 days, the downtown comes alive with traditional arts from across the United States, representing a vast diversity of art forms and traditions that have been carried in communities that express cultural traditions and really showcase the heart and soul of America. So the environment includes 7 stages, performances, dance, a family area, a marketplace, food and eatery opportunities, a vast folk life area with artist demonstrators. And so it is very much an experiential event where you can come in and you can be exposed to incredible music that much of it may be new to you for the first time, or an old favorite that you've been beloved by your family or a community that you can get up and close to. So the event over its 3 days is a real driver of activity and energy for the downtown, economic development, and really just a way that the community has come together to celebrate culture and the arts from across the United States.
Now, this obviously has a long history. Give some sense. It reaches back really, the 1930s or so? Yeah?
That's right. So this is the 79th National Folk Festival, and it has had different models over those years, but that it travels now as pattern every 3 years to a new community. And it's awarded by a selection process. And so Salisbury put forth a very competitive application to be the host city. And when the National Folk Festival leaves after its 3-year stay, the model is that a local festival is left in order to continue to celebrate traditional culture from the host community. Some of your listeners may be familiar with the Richmond Folk Festival, which was a past national site, and their Richmond event is extremely very much a model for the way in which we were able to ensure success in the host community with their successor festival.
So, Caroline, I want to turn to you. And this is obviously, the second year, I guess, for Salisbury. We got one more year, but then obviously we're going to continue on. What kind of impact has this had in terms of how we're putting on the festival? I know it was a little rainy, I think, the last time out.
I didn't notice the rain. That's so strange. We've been prepping since the day after the last year's festival, and we're moving forward with year 2. We've had amazing success stories from last year's festival. We've seen an incredible economic impact of about $18 million in the area of direct transactions, with $1.2 million in dollars returning in the next 12 months just from people coming and experiencing the Eastern Shore and saying, wow, this place is amazing. So we hope to not only have a repeat of that success, but also to grow that success. And we have all these indicators that are showing that this year is going to be even bigger and even better.
Anything, by the way, that we're doing differently than, say, once we did last year?
Well, as you plan something and you continue it every year, you tweak and you modify, you see what worked, what didn't work, what needs to change. And we've been doing that again, meeting with all our committees, meeting with our volunteers, with our team leaders, with different local members of the community, with local businesses, to see what worked for you and what didn't, so that we can, again, we always have that opportunity to improve and to grow, and we're definitely taking that.
So I want to turn now to some of the acts that have been announced, and we want to turn to Blaine here. And so first of all, just an overall sense about some of the musical acts that we're going to be talking about. They really certainly vary in terms of the cultures, the places that they come from.
Sure. I mean, what we do with the National Folk Festival, it's a celebration of how we collectively define our nation at any point in time, from the longest standing residents, indigenous communities here in the country, all the way up through new immigrant communities. We like to say it's a snapshot of America at any given point in time to really capture that rich tapestry and wealth of experiences. We also, it's always the finest traditional artists in the country, and the National is never a repeat program. So it's always artists who were not here last year. They're always new artists who have not been to the festival before, and that's a way of really celebrating and bringing as much diversity and as many of the nation's finest traditional artists to the festival as we can.
So let's take a look at the first one. Adonis Puentes and the Voice of Cuba Orchestra. Tell us first a little bit about its history and what should you expect to hear?
Sure. This group is led by, obviously, Adonis Puentes, who is one of the finest young Cuban band leaders out there today. They carry on the sound of classic Cuban son music. It's one of the foundational traditional music forms in Cuba. It's the basis of all that came after in terms of salsa or timba or what have you. And this is a tradition that comes out of the island's Afro-Cuban heritage, combining African rhythms with Spanish canción, or the Spanish song tradition, and really emerging at around the late 19th century after the abolition of slavery, and people are beginning to move from rural areas into urban areas. So you have this really exciting rural-urban interchange, and you have a string tradition that's starting to emerge, also with hand percussion, but then this really fascinating element comes in during Prohibition. Americans are coming down to Havana, bringing with them the sounds of jazz from the day, and that layer gets added on to the texture of Cuban son music. And so you have these wonderful horn sections added on to the string traditions and the hand percussion. And that really comes to be one of the defining sounds of Cuban son music. And really, a lot of Americans may associate that sound with the Buena Vista Social Club, which is, in fact, what has impacted artists from Adonis's generation as well.
Let's hear just a little bit of it with Adonis Puentes and the Voice of the Cuban Orchestra.
Pues ahora café. El beso de la mañana tenía sabor a café y el aroma de recuerdo del tiempo que se nos fue. Ha pasado una jornada y sigo queriéndola a usted. Melodía y sentimientos salpicados de café. Pero ¿por qué será que a tu lado, vida mía, no tengo miedo a ver pasar el tiempo?
And before we leave that voice, tell us a little bit about Adonis' personal history.
Sure. He comes from the small town of Artesia in western Cuba. He comes from a musical family where they grew up. Across the street was the Casa de Cultura, which was a community center, a cultural center. His father taught there, and he taught Adonis, as well as his twin brother Alexis, how to play guitar and sing from a very young age. The two of them together went on to join different national ensembles. And from there, Adonis ends up, he's now in Vancouver, Canada, and he migrates there and has had amazing success. He's been nominated for 1 Grammy, as well as several Juno Awards. Those are the Canadian Grammys, essentially. And as I said earlier, he's really come on to be seen as one of the leading soneros of today, and one of the great young band leaders. We're thrilled to have him here, and he's going to do great sets on a number of stages, including the dance tent, where people are going to get up and move and have a great time.
I want to turn to Morocco. And we have the Ganawa, I think it's called. Tell us a little bit about this particular kind of music.
Sure. Ganawa music, or the term Ganawa, refers to both a style or a musical tradition, as well as a cultural group, a group of people. And these are descendants of sub-Saharan Africans who migrated. Who not migrated, but were forced to migrate in the 11th century up to Morocco, where they were brought as slaves or soldiers. And due to that migration, that crossing of cultures that took place because of that, what you have are mixing, it's a Sufi tradition, so it's mystical Islam, but taking the solo devotional singing we associate with Arabic music and mixing that with the call and response more commonly associated with sub-Saharan traditions. It's a musical form that's key to rituals that are part of community and individual healing purifications through. It's a trance music that puts people in a state of mind that helps them sort of rid themselves of spirits and reach that level of purification. The ensembles are led by master artists who are referred to by the honorific title of malam, and they know this vast repertoire and often play a sintir, which was a bass, three-string lute, and have a chorus or a kuyoy of singers who accompany them in that call and response style, while also playing a karkab or handheld percussion castanets. So it's this really richly textured music meant to bring about trance and bring healing and purification. So it's got this fascinating history.
It also, by the way, there's also celebrates, I guess, Saturdays. Tell me a little bit about that. Go ahead.
Sure. It's a Sabbatien, and that is what that is in Morocco. There was a close relationship between the Gnawa community and the Jewish community in Morocco, and it's a special repertoire. And the Malam of Gnawa, Malam Hassan bin Jafar, he's very knowledgeable about this particular repertoire, and it touches on that shared cultural connection between the Moroccan Jewish community and the Gnawa community, and they do that in celebration of the close bond they had with the Jewish community there in Morocco.
Let's hear a little bit of it. I mean, it does have a certain African quality to it. Even things, for instance, I've heard out of, say, South Africa, that there's a certain commonality, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, I think across a lot of music from that part of the world, call and response structures are very important, as well as the strong rhythmic element, and even in the playing of the sintir. It's a very heavily rhythmic music that has a very pulsating and that hypnotic element also ties back to the trance. That it's a music that's supposed to put you in trance and help have that community and individual experience.
So let's turn to a little more of an American, one of my favorite kinds of music, which is, I guess it's been described as soul blues or blues with Eddie Cotton Jr. Tell me a little bit about the kind of blues we're going to hear here.
Sure. There's blues is such a rich tradition. You have Chicago blues, Delta blues, Piedmont blues, West Coast blues, and one of the forms that's really come out, and I'd say the latter half of the 20th century, and was really popular with, in particular, continues to be very popular with the African American audience, is soul blues. And that's a tradition that takes the gritty guitar work we associate more commonly with blues and combines that with the smoother gospel-influenced vocal stylings of soul and R&B. So it's got a couple of different elements that going on, and when a master musician in that tradition like Eddie plays, it really is designed. It moves the body and the spirit, and really just fully engages you lyrically through the different textures of the music. So it's going to be nice to bring that as sort of a contrast to what we had last year with a great St. Louis musician like Marquise Knox.
I was reading it, sort of the goal is to, I think, find the pocket, I think is how to describe that spiritual kind of transcendence. I think the quote I saw was, the music just pulsates in everyone's mind and heart. Just tell me how that works from this music.
Sure. I mean, that's a phrase Eddie draws on a lot anytime he's talking about the music, about getting in the pocket. And that's just when he and the band find that find that right groove together and are able to build that connection to the audience, and the sort of boundaries there that aren't disappear. And it's it's something. Eddie comes from a deep church tradition in his family, which I can talk about in a sec. But it's the same thing that happens with the church when the idea, and it's a Pentecostal tradition that Eddie comes out of, with getting the Spirit and feeling moved by the Spirit. And so it's just when the music and the audience are just connected, and it's experience of transcendence, and you've just found that sweet spot. And everybody's right there together.
Let's see a little bit.
Hey, that little cutie. Oh yeah, check you out. There's something you could do for me, and I'm sure I have no doubt. Yes, the very sight of you makes me feel so good. You can solve all my problems. Only if you would.
Tell me a little bit about Eddie's own personal background.
Sure. Eddie comes from Clinton, Mississippi, which is very near to the capital of Jackson. So he's not from out of the Delta. He's more from the south central area part of the state, as I mentioned earlier. Coming from out of the Pentecostal church, specifically the Church of God in Christ. His dad was a minister and got Eddie his first guitar at the age of 6, not meaning for Eddie to go out and play blues or anything, but for him to play in the church band, which Eddie was doing by the age of 8, continued to take on a much more involved role with it. And Eddie's got this great story, actually. When he was 18, he had developed quite a reputation in the area for his work playing with the church band, and without really seeking it out, was offered a scholarship to study music theory at Jackson State University. Got the call, thought, okay, I guess so, why not? And went and did it. And what's so fascinating is he gets there not having really any experience playing the blues yet, and he immediately recognized in the 12-bar blues structures and whatnot that he's learning at school, oh, this is just the congregational songs I was playing in church growing up. And so he likes to say that's the deepest blues I've ever played is what I played growing up in church. So he had that really strong foundation. He goes to Jackson State, comes out, goes back to being the minister of music at his church, which is he's still doing that today. But at the same time, he starts going around Jackson with the patriarch of the local blues scene, a gentleman by the name of King Edward Antoine, and works his way up, went on to win the International Blues Music Challenge in Memphis in 2015. And now he travels Europe playing blues. He's playing in the local casinos down in Mississippi, which is a big opportunity for blues performers down there. But on Sunday, if he's not out on the road, he's still at church, leading the church band and participating in the ministry.
We're going to shift a little to Jerry Douglas Trio, and I guess it was basically a steel guitar.
Yeah, so Jerry, I like to say, how often can you say when you bring somebody to a festival that you're bringing the best to ever play the instrument that person plays? Well, that's true with Jerry, and that instrument is the dobro. And the dobro is basically a steel resonator guitar. It's a guitar with a metal resonator that's played with a slide. It became popular during the Hawaiian music craze in the 1920s and 30s, and eventually was picked up by blues and bluegrass musicians. And it's something Jerry was exposed to. He grew up in a Rust Belt town in Ohio. His father was a steel worker who played bluegrass on the side. Took his son out to see a Flatt and Scruggs concert, and that's where Jerry discovered the playing of the great Uncle Josh Graves, one of the great bluegrass dobro players. And Jerry saw that and said, you know what, that's what I want to do with my life.
Let's hear a little bit about it. His style has been described as being rich in tone and lightning fast.
Yeah, I mean, Jerry is, there's really nothing he can't do with the dobro, but that's really how he's made his name starting out. He started in bluegrass playing with groups like the Country Gentlemen, J.D. Crowe and the New South, transitioned into being a session musician in Nashville. And from there, he's just broken all kinds of boundaries. He's influenced everything from rock and roll and jazz to blues and Celtic music, mainstream country, even done some classical music collaborations with Yo-Yo Ma. He's played with Paul Simon, Bela Fleck, Reba McEntire, Ray Charles. Just so much that Jerry's done. And just to touch on some of the many, many awards he's been recognized with, he has 14 Grammy Awards. He's received 28 International Bluegrass Music Association honors. That's the highest award given out by the bluegrass community. And he also has a National Heritage Fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, which is the highest honor our federal government gives for folk and traditional artists. And he continues to receive really high acclaim for some of his more recent collaborations, including the Earls of Leicester, a group he's put together, and he's a co-director of BBC Scotland's acclaimed Transatlantic Session. So it's just so exciting to bring him here, and due to his great versatility and wide range, all kinds of exciting collaborations are in store for audiences when Jerry hits the stage.
I want to turn to Aurelio Martinez. Describe for me Central American in terms of music, but not traditionally what we think of.
No, it's Aurelio represents a fascinating story. He comes from the Garifuna. He's a member of the Garifuna people. The Garifuna. And the Garifuna he's a great musical ambassador and champion of the Garifuna, and they're a culturally threatened people and culture who currently they're based along the coast of Belize, Honduras, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. But it's a really fascinating story. It's an African Amerindian culture group, and they're the descendants of Africans who landed on the island of St. Vincent in 1675 after the wreck of a slave ship. There they intermarried with local indigenous groups, the Carib and the Arawak peoples. And then a couple of hundred years later, in the late 18th century, they were deported by the British to Central America, and that's how they end up where they are now. But it's makes it a great challenge to maintain their heritage, their cultural traditions. They've been recognized by UNESCO as one of the masterpieces of the oral and tangible heritage of humanity, and it's due to the efforts of artists like Aurelio, who really advocate for and share and help preserve the dance and the music and the language and the culture of the Garifuna. And it's just so great to bring a spirit and a beautiful artist like him who can share that with festival audiences this September.
Let's get a little flavor of that.
Ai ai, oi oi, ai ai, oi oi.
Just briefly, what is his background?
Sure,
His history.
Sure. So, like so many of the artists we bring to the National Folk Festival, it's in his family. At the age of 6, he starts playing drums in social gatherings, and then he made his first guitar out of fishing line and driftwood. Meanwhile, his father has moved to New York City, where there's a large Garifuna community, and he's sending tapes back to Aurelio, and that's how he's teaching himself. And at the same time, his mother is also a respected singer and composer who he often pays tribute to in his performances. So he has that family foundation, and then he went on to be mentored by the great Andy Palacio, one of the other wonderful Garifuna musicians. And Andy tragically passed away suddenly about a decade ago, and Aurelio has really picked up the mantle and carried forward. One other really interesting note about Aurelio is he was the first senator of African descent to serve in the Honduran Congress. That period passed, but he's still performing wonderful music, advocating for Garifuna culture, and he's just celebrated his 30th anniversary as a performing artist.
Finally, in terms of music, let's turn to Hot Club of Cowtown. it's been described as combining, I guess, two 1930s traditions.
Yeah, and it's all embedded right there in their name. The name Hot Club of Cowtown is a reference to the two of the bands who really are identified with the styles of music they play. First, you have Western Swing, and that's Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys. And then you have Hot Jazz, and that is Django Reinhardt and Stefan Grappelli of the Hot Club of Paris. And that's what Hot Club is really touching on, and there's just so much amazing individual talent in the trio of musicians who make up this group, really charming together on stage. You have Alana James on fiddle and vocals. She grew up in Prairie Village, Kansas, started playing fiddle and violin at a young age, but it was when she responded to an ad in the Village Voice that she met guitar whiz Whit Smith, who's known for his vintage tone and impeccable style. They came together with slap bass player Jake Irwin out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, another Western Swing hotbed, and have just ever since been the preeminent Western Swing group out there playing the music.
So let's hear a little bit of it, and then we'll come back to it.
Parlor fires and the great clocks on the mantel says it's getting late. Curtains on the window snowy white. The parlor's blessing on a Sunday night. Ida red, I'm plumb fool about Ida red. Ida red, I'm plumb fool about Ida red.
One of the things that strikes me, by the way, is that the fiddle really plays this sort of prominent role that sort of slips in and out. Very much, we've heard that, for instance, in bluegrass music as well, that really plays that prominent role.
Oh, sure. And there's so many different flavors in how they play, but Alana's fiddle making is right there, and really, I think that's one of the great things about the two traditions they're drawing on, is because also touching on the influence of Stefan Grappelli and his great violin work with the hot jazz sound, and bringing that into what they're doing with Western swing music, which is really at the core of the foundation of it, because Western swing was a combination of country string band music and old time fiddle traditions, again back to that pronounced role of the fiddle, but merging that with the big band jazz that was so big back in the 20s and 30s.
I want to turn, by the way, to a couple of other acts. Dancers. Tell us a little bit about, I guess, the Jones Benelli family dancers. What's that about?
Sure. So this is, as the name says, it's a family group, 3 generations in one family, led by the family patriarch, Jones Benelli. This is a group coming to the festival from the Navajo Nation outside of Flagstaff and Black Mesa, Arizona. And Jones Benelli, the family patriarch, he is what's called a hatali, which is, it's a singer, it's a dancer, and it's a healer. It's a community leader, and it's something that was passed on to him from his father and grandfather. And a big piece of this is the hoop dance tradition. And Jones Benelli is a multi-time world champion of this tradition. And so you've got 5, 9, up to a dozen hoops. And he's bringing them sort of up from the ground as he's dancing with his feet, and incorporating them as he goes, adding more and more hoops. And really, in doing so, replicating different images or figures from the natural world, whether it's the wings of a bird or something like that. But it's all tied to these efforts at touching on community shared culture and bringing about healing.
And then we go around the world, as it were, and actually a Tamil tradition out of India. Tell me a little bit about what we should expect to see there.
Sure. So this is a great young group coming out of New York City, Yamini Kalluri and the Carnatic Ensemble. And Yamini is a Kuchipudi dancer. Kuchipudi is one of the 9 classical dance forms from India. It's what's called a dance drama. So it's telling stories from out of Hindu mythology about gods like Shiva and Krishna. And so mime and expressivity of sort of in terms of facial gesture, subtle but in a way that conveys story, is very important. And she'll be joined by a trio of musicians playing Carnatic music, because this is a South Indian tradition. And it's on mridangam, which is a double-headed barrel-shaped drum, and violin, and a vocalist. And it's in that dynamic between performer and vocalist, that so much of that storytelling component comes across, and we're just really thrilled to have him. Yamini is a rising star in the Kuchipudi world. She's come to the States after living most of her life in Hyderabad, India, and has really started to turn heads with what she's doing in New York City. This is going to be one of her first major performances at a festival like this, so we're really excited to bring her to audiences here in Salisbury.
Well, we've been speaking with Blaine Wade. He's the Associate Director with the National Council for the Traditional Arts. Also, we've been talking to Lora Bottinelli. She's the Executive Director, and Caroline O'Hare, who is managing locally. And we appreciate you guys stopping by and chatting with us.
Cool.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Rank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on Pack 14.